talking about unmasking fraud in a sea of sessions, right? Insights beyond IP. So I'm excited about this because I think anything we can do to deal with fraud a bit better and more effectively, we're all here for it. So Riley, the floor is yours.
Uh, Great. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk today about residential proxies more specifically, and just all the types of fraud and stuff that they kind of commit across e-commerce, banking, and others. Um, cool. This is my first time using the Zoom controls, so bear with me a little bit. Um, Our agenda today is really going to dive into what is the state of the art for IP level insights today and how that works with residential proxies. We're going to dive into what is next generation, like how do we differentiate, the bad guy on a mobile proxy on T-Mobile with 5,000 users on it. Like we're going to talk a little bit about how do you do that without applying friction to everybody. Additionally, we're going to dive into what even is bad when we're talking about the haystack of connections that are happening from these kind of types of infrastructure. Like CG NAT is kind of the future. The number of services that are offering single gateways that all exit the same IPv4 address. And now, as a defender, you're looking at this and you have 1,000 different logins at your bank, all from the same IP address. How do we start differentiating those? So, first off, what is a residential proxy? And I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit into what is the history and what is a traditional proxy, and then how that's evolved over time and where we are today and what kind of risks and stuff that we're associating with those. So, traditional services, think of these like NordVPN, ExpressVPN, Molvad, all the types of services that are very data center centric. And if you look at the IP address on it, it's going to be coming from a data center. It's not coming from Comcast. It's not coming from Verizon. It's very static. Originally, a lot of these services, you'd connect to one IP address, and then the website would see that same IP address as what you're exiting out of. So if I connect to, dot one, we're exiting out of dot one on every website. As things have evolved, services have been doing you enter one and then you exit something else out of that same slash 29 or same slash 24. So you enter the dot one, you exit out of dot 253, but at the end of the day, it's all data center space, so nothing's really changed. Um, there's a service out there that I've talked about in the past. If you've seen any other presentation that I've given, especially around North Korean actors, called Astral VPN. That one's even a little bit more unique. You enter in one IP address and you exit out a whole different AS. So you might be entering, data center one and leaving out of data center 12, but at the end of the day, still a data center. So as a defender, you look at it and you might have the great IP intelligence that tells you that that's a VPN or that's a proxy, and you can make easy decisions. You can block that or allow it depending on what your policies are, but you can make those very granular decisions without too much gray area in there. Um, so residential proxies, they kind of date back quite a while. Like I didn't start looking at this problem until about 2019, but early 2010s, there was a service out there called VIP 72 or VIP 72, and that was actually just a botnet. And they tried to make it sound like it was a proxy service, but you were exiting out of malware victims. So there was somebody in Comcast had a compromised router or compromised machine. You'd be exiting out of their home network. And that was just criminal. That was just malware. But now, these large companies that are out there, like Oxy Labs, Smart Proxy, all these others, have just rebranded malware and called them SDKs. And so, if you embed this SDK into your application, you can get away with anything as long as it's in your terms of service. So now, if I go to the App Store and I download a game on my phone, embedded in the terms of service might be something like I'm selling the bandwidth of my phone and whatever network I'm connected to, which I probably don't actually have permission to do that, but that's not a topic for today. So anywhere my phone is connected is now a proxy, and a customer of that proxy network can buy access to my device specifically and proxy out of it. So if I'm at home, they're coming out of my Comcast IP address. Um, if I move and I go to Starbucks or something like that, or drive over to Starbucks, now I'm exiting out of Starbucks. And if I'm just on the road for the day, now it's exiting out of T-Mobile. And it's kind of wherever my phone is becomes that proxy. Some of these networks are even smarter and will charge more if I'm on mobile because with mobile proxies, there's more people on there, right? Like there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of people routed out of the same IPv4 address for T-Mobile. So while I'm connected to T-Mobile, they can charge $10 a gigabyte instead of $5 a gigabyte and make more money that way. So there's a couple different ways that these residential proxies do this. And one of those is uh, the SDKs, like I talked about, where just embedded software. You pay the app developer to include it, and they make some money. The other is the what are called get paid to applications. So you might download something like Honeygain or EarnApp, where they just tell you that they'll give you, some cryptocurrency for your bandwidth, and they're just flat out paying the users to run it. That's a little bit more on the up and up because you're opting into it. You're very aware. You're making money off of it. But who knows? Your kids might be doing it unknown to you, and now your home network is perpetuating fraud. Um, Mobile proxies, I talked about a little bit already. And like, my real device, if it's connected to mobile, now they're charging more. But there's also things like the SIM farms that are out there. And um, I think there's like that major bust that happened earlier where, Secret Service identified a SIM farm in New York City, and it was this whole new thing to them. These things have been around for a decade or more, originally for SMS based like fraud, but now are used for also mobile proxies. So IP intelligence. On that previous slide, we talked a lot about traditional services, NordVPN, Molvad. That is a very black and white problem. From corporate security, you might say no employee can log in to the corporate VPN from Molvad or Nord. But let's say, for instance, you give out a corporate ExpressVPN subscription or something like that. You might want to allow ExpressVPN. But either way, it's still a black and white problem. If you're going to disallow something, you just disallow all of it. The bigger issue, though, is residential proxies start blending in with real people. Back to the idea of my phone, if I try to log into my bank and I have Solitaire installed on my phone, how does the bank know it's not a residential proxy user and it's me, the actual person that's there? So it starts becoming a little bit more of a gray area, and doing simple blocking. Now you're going to get complaints. You're going to get that like friction for the user. And I'm going to complain to the bank. Why can't I log in? I don't understand. And now they say something about my phone. Like it becomes, you're shifting the problem onto the end user that probably has no technical capacity to figure out which application or thing did I download that's causing other people to be able to proxy through it. And from the bank standpoint, they want to reduce risk, that kind of thing. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging. What do you do in those particular cases? Some people add user friction, which I think is probably the most appropriate way if you're only able to use IP intelligence. Unfortunately, in the case of a mobile proxy, now you're applying a lot of friction to all the users on that proxy or on that IP address. And that ends up being just maybe a little bit more challenging for people. But at the end of the day, if that is all you have access to is IP-based intelligence, all you know is that this IP is connecting. There is a residential proxy on it, but there's also a ton of other people on it. So that's really the only thing that you're able to like determine at that point. So session layer intelligence, this goes deeper. And instead of looking at just the IP as a whole, you're looking at this one connection from one particular person on this IP address. And you're going to dive further and you're going to try to make more of an assessment and a determination on that. this ends up being just much more able to be like granular. You can block a specific session without impacting every user that's on there. IP-based intelligence for residential proxies is really good at looking at trends. So I have a bad activity that has happened. Um, I have a whole series of fraud. I combine all the IP addresses for the fraud activity to my IP intelligence, and I see Oxylabs proxy or Nine proxy or any of these other services are on every IP address of this fraudulent activity. That's really good for now knowing like, okay, that is where my problems are coming from. But if I want to actually block based off of it or do something, it becomes a little bit more challenging. One of the things that we have looked at in the past was we had this major financial institution that was having a problem of human-based fraud. So this isn't automated. This is a real person behind a keyboard doing fraudulent activity. And services like reCAPTCHA or Cloudflare, like those are great for bots and things like that, but a real human can click that button, can click that checkbox, and has that behavior on the screen that's really indicative of a real person. So this financial institution was having this like phishing campaign that was done against them, where a real user, like a real uh, customer of the bank, would be on a call or something with the bad guy and would go to their login page and would type in the username and password. And at the time that this was happening, the bad guy would actually buy a proxy using a service called 911. And if the user was located in Denver, Colorado on CenturyLink, they would buy an IP address in Denver, Colorado on CenturyLink. It might not be the exact same IP address, but it'd be very geographically close. It'd be the same ISP. It would be match all the same profile. So uh, the two-factor would happen, and they type in two-factor on this phishing site, and it sends it to the bad guy. The bad guy types in that two-factor, and then on the other end, it says that the two-factor was invalid. And the real user, the bank customer, would type in a two-factor again. They'd get another one sent to them. And by the time they typed in the second one, the wire transfer already happened because the bad guy had purchased that IP address, plugged in the first two-factor to log in. The second two-factor was the wire transfer. And by just making the phishing page say that they had typed it incorrectly, it gave them another shot at being able to get a second two-factor code from the user. And once again, this is all human-driven fraud. It was high-end fraud. So each attempt was tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen. And it was nothing that Cloudflare or reCAPTCHA or any of these tools could do because it's a real human driving that fraudulent activity. But at the end of the day, the overlap between what bots are doing and what this like human-based fraud is they're both trying to hide themselves on the internet. So by looking at the actual TCP connection and doing analysis of how the packets move across the wire, how the timing happens, how the DNS is used, how all the aspects of that connection happen, you're able to identify that common thread between computer bot-driven activity and this human fraud. Because both are just trying to hide themselves on the internet and they're using anonymity services like residential proxies to do that. And by looking at the session, you'll be able to actually stop that and be able to say that's the real user versus the bad user. Another great example are Infostealers. So Infostealers these days, if you all are familiar, download an application, steals all of your Chrome passwords, your history, your cookies, all that information, and sends it to the bad guys. And one of the things that they're now installing with it is called a service called Ghost Socks. And Ghost Socks is a private proxy software where now that bad guy has access to your actual machine. So in the previous case of having to buy an IP address in Denver on Comcast or CenturyLink, whatever, now you get the actual person's internet connection and you can replay those cookies. So now you have the best look possible. However, in the case of session analysis, and you look at the TCP connection, you start seeing that, hey, one of these connections is direct. I'm getting a connection directly from the users themselves. But if I look at the timing on the second connection where the cookie's being replayed, you start seeing here's inconsistencies. Things are taking a lot longer. DNS is looking different. All these other factors are happening. And yes, it is coming from the same IP address, but maybe the real user is beyond that IP address. And session analysis would give you that like key of this is not the actual user. Something here is odd. So back to the identifying the needle in the haystack. And that last example is less of a haystack, and here's a victim of malware. But um, on the case of session analysis, one of the really cool things here is that you can start identifying some of these anomalies on the very first use. So IP intelligence, often is derived by crawling these services and other things, and maybe using a residential proxy to identify all the IP addresses that they have. But if it's the very first use of a proxy, how are you going to determine it? How would IP intelligence know? Additionally, in that example of the Ghost socks, it's a private proxy. IP intelligence services can't necessarily identify a private proxy service like this, where it's only for one user and there's no way of identifying it on the network because it's based on a malware infection. So being able to identify it on its very first use and using session-based analysis and TCP timing, TCP session characteristics, DNS, and others will allow you to identify it before an IP intelligence vendor like myself does it themselves. Um, so now you're able to do some of that more granular tuning. Like I can now block individual sessions and not impact or add friction at all. So in the case of those T-Mobile gateways that have 1,000 users on it, if you're using just IP intelligence, you're going to apply friction, two-factor codes, things like that across all of those sessions. But in the case of doing session analysis, I can leave all of those alone. All of them can log in like normal and use cookies that they already have. But that one session that looks bad, that has that invalid timing, now I can up the game there. I can um, outright block them. I can invalidate their cookies and require a relogin. With Infostealers, a lot of times with the cookie replays, just invalidating the cookies and requiring a login again is enough because they're not able to actually do the username, password, and multi-factor that would be required to get a cookie. Um, so by being able to just make that like determination and decide in certain cases to invalidate something is really only possible with session-based analysis. So here's an example of an e-commerce platform that we helped. And this isn't as exciting. This isn't fraud in the normal sense. This is just price scraping. And there's a lot of reasons that price scraping happens and residential proxies are used. A lot of times residential proxies are used because pricing is different in different jurisdictions. So if I'm in San Francisco, the pricing that I see on my e-commerce app might be a little bit different. And additionally, this was actually e-commerce and delivery. Um, this particular case had something very interesting where uh, the bad guy, so to speak, was actually one of the manufacturers of an item that was being sold through that website, and they were trying to figure out every website that sells their product, what was their markup? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Are they selling it at the MSRP? What is the delivery upcharge that they charge for delivering my specific product? And they were using residential proxies to check out each jurisdiction and what that cost is. However, our customer builds all of their sales analytics off of actual engagement on the website. And they have all these sales dashboards and others that are just trying to figure out how many pages does a user visit before they buy something. And if somebody is crawling and scraping their website, I view 1,000 pages and never buy anything really ends up skewing their dashboards. And this isn't even, like I said, fraud based. This is just them wanting to make sure that they have the most accurate data to be able to convey to their shareholders, their growth and what they expect to make, and just all their statistics and numbers for usage across their website. Um, but They used a couple of different tools. Cloudflare was one of their main ones, and they used a another third-party vendor for additional bot security. And all the residential proxies, like one of the interesting things about Bright Data is they actually sell a service called Web Unlocker that allows you to bypass Cloudflare, bypass Datadome, bypass um, all sorts of different protections, and by doing that, scrape the website. And this graph here, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it means. However, the customer sent this to us and was so excited by the results. They were like, this shows that you're blocking it. And their dashboard started to be representative of what real browsing on their website was. They started being able to understand that, a normal user searches for 3 items before going to checkout. And that was all previously skewed by the web crawling activity. So now they were able to distinguish the genuine users from the scraping tools. And honestly, they didn't care that these customers were scraping it. It was just that it was affecting their dashboard usage. So one of the things that they could do if they wanted to is allow those users in, but tag it differently so that their dashboard filters out that activity, but still allow the web scraping and web crawling to happen because sometimes that's a valid reason. On the other hand, they didn't want the added data center and infrastructure costs. Like it cost them money to serve content through Cloudflare. So by blocking it or limiting the crawling, they actually saved a bunch of money because they didn't have to serve up content when it wasn't necessary and it wasn't going to lead to a true sale. So, like, if you want to do some practical methods for analyzing user sessions, like, uh, you can trust but verify. So, one of the things that we often suggest is serve up, do your session analysis right up in the beginning, and give them a signed cookie that has like the IP address they're on and just some other user stuff. And every page load, just verify that that cookie is still valid. But if they change IP addresses, now you might have to reevaluate them. And one of the reasons why you want to do that is in the case of the info stealer and things are stolen, if they steal that cookie that says, hey, I passed session analysis, make sure that they're like still actually valid. This is something that actually Cloudflare does really well, is making sure that each analysis to IP address, if you change IP addresses, it's going to have to do that analysis again. But in many cases, you kind of need to roll your own a little bit. Um, but uh, you can add friction now to users that have that session. So in the case of the previous example with the e-commerce platform, you can just outright block them or deny them. In other cases, you can throw them to, hey, you can only view the first page of our website, but if you want to go beyond that, you need to log in or you need to do something. Or any other types of blocking that you can think of. A lot of our customers, especially in financial institutions, like residential proxies, they'll block outright because there's no legitimate reason to use a residential proxy. But if you're logging in from something like Molvad, like I use Molvad all the time and I log into my bank account, I'm sure that my bank is flagging my session. But they should know that I regularly log in from Molvad. And if all of a sudden I log in from NordVPN, that's kind of weird. That's outside the normal of what this user is doing. And I should require two-factor or some additional verification. I hate the term zero trust, but kind of applying this with its original meaning and not the meaning it's kind of turned into or the buzzwords that it is, but really use this session-based analysis and stuff to trust but verify the user, right? You have all these cookies that you send them, but verify that they're correct. Also, do that analysis, check that TCP timing, check the DNS information, and try to figure out if something is skewed. Um, and that's kind of where I dive into like uh, our session-based analysis tool is called Monocle, and we actually just give it away for free for 10 million monthly assessments. And 99% of websites can do it with the free amount. Very few websites go over 10 million monthly users. And Monocle incorporates a lot of that IP intelligence that we have, but it goes a step beyond because now it applies that session-based analysis and be able to tell you, hey, that is a VPN or that's a proxy, or hey, that's neither of the two. In often cases, hey, it's proxied and it's an anonymous proxy. This is one that they're intentionally trying to obfuscate who they are. And Monocle can be deployed with an edge deployment. So there's no third-party API request. It's just simple JavaScript integrated on your website, and you immediately get that proxy and VPN detection. And you get that ability to identify whether or not somebody's coming from a anonymous VPN or proxy or other, and let all the clean users through so that you don't have to apply friction to everybody. You only have to apply friction to where it's needed. And now, if there's any questions, I'd love to cover them.
What we're seeing, hey Riley, that was great. Thank you very much. It certainly was sort of interesting to see the different sort of layering of intelligence there to sort of figure out what's going on in people's organizations. And I know, a lot of organizations are really focused around bot detection these days because, well, they're everywhere. So that's a major factor here. I was going to actually ask you a question just while this comes in. Well, actually, no, hold on. I'll see if we can get through this. But Stephen just had a question. How do you work with a company to allow your VPN connection since
Yeah.
he uses Proton Mail?
Okay, so that's one of those cases of, enterprises might offer a service like Proton or others, and you end up having to whitelist that, which isn't necessarily the best strategy because anybody with $10 in crypto can go buy a Proton account and look like they're you. So if you like to use Proton, I can connect to the same server as you are, but some enterprises, like I said, offer that for their employees while they're traveling, and you'll have to allow that in because that's what your employees are using. So there's also a difference between that and like things like Global Connect and enterprise grade VPNs. Like I'd suggest all companies set up an enterprise grade VPN that is non-anonymous, that is meant for employees that don't have the like no log policies, things like that, because that's where they really get you is no log and anonymous VPNs are the things that people want to block.